everybody's into their own thing. Some people are into heavy metal, some people are into being junior executives. We're into this just because this scene gives you the opportunity to be an individual and you get to say what you want to say.
Because no trend is safe from the porn sick men of the world. No,
Most goth girls are super ugly. Go into a hot topic and you know what you're gonna see? Fat bitches.
Goth Dommy mommy! Goth Dommy mommy! Shut the fuck up! I don't appreciate being fat.
Ranking all the goth cartoon baddies from worst to best. Why?
What do you call yourselves?
Gothic.
What does that mean?
It's just the type of music we like and the way we dress and the makeup, like his style.
As a younger sibling of the punk movement, the goth subculture has become less and less about the clothes you wear, the music you listen to, and what politics you follow, and more a category of sorts. That's something I've noticed for as long as I've been on the internet, or as long as the rise of e-girls has existed. But this video and this whole rant got truly set in motion once I received the DM, "I'd let you me." I'm going to be looking down in this video quite a lot, simply because I wrote down a script and I researched a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about, and I don't really have my setup figured out yet, so I hope it won't be too annoying. With the rise of social media in the 21st century, the goth and the punk scene have changed in both good ways and bad. Apps like Instagram and TikTok made these subcultures spread once again, showing people who struggle finding their place in society how their parents and their parents and their parents revolted against it. But with those apps on the rise, the foundations of the scene are starting to crack. The political and the environmental stance of the genres are often ignored in this day and age, simply because the genres have become almost watered down. The political and the environmental stance of the genre are often ignored in this day and age, but they are just as important as all the other aspects of those subcultures. And if we truly want to understand how much of a role it plays, we have to look at the political and economical stance of the original punk movement. Without the punk movement, there wouldn't be a post-punk movement, there wouldn't be a new wave movement, there wouldn't be a goth movement. Without punk, without post-punk, we wouldn't know what goth is today. The original punk movement was defined by their wants of individual freedom and their anti-establishment views. The most common viewpoints included individual liberty, authoritarianism, a DIY ethic, nonconformity, anti-corporatism, anti-government, and anti-capitalism. Basically, direct action, or even in less difficult terms, being yourself without judgment from others and without judging others. Bands in the early punk community were putting emphasis more so on being raw and anti-elite, rather than being skilled musicians. A lot of the bands with skilled musicians were therefore judged because they would be called art school elitists or tryhards. During the subculture's infancy, members were almost always from a lower economic class, and they had become tired of the affluence that was associated with popular rock music at the time. Punks would publish their own music or sign with independent labels in hopes to combat what they saw as the money-hungry music industry. The punk and eventually post-punk movements were actively talking about the socio-political environments of their time. The audience was young, their attitude portrayed through their lyrics spoke to the youth, who desperately tried to get away from certain societal expectations. While the rock and metal scenes were mainly dominated by white men, punk opened the doors for women and people of color due to their anyone-can-do-it ethic. The anarchic mindset of the punk and eventually a post-punk movement heavily encouraged the voices of the outcasts in society, including women and people of color, to make significant changes to the genre. Chrissie Hynde, lead singer of The Pretenders, later spoke on the topic saying, "That was the beauty of punk. Sexual discrimination didn't exist in that scene. I want to bring up the sexual discrimination in the punk scene later, since I think it's important for now to focus on the shift towards post-punk. Books like Rip It Up and Start Again by Simon Reynolds show an insight into the evolution from punk to post-punk. Reynolds brings on the argument that post-punk was a result of people realizing that the punk movement in and of itself and their attitude was powerful, but it was musically limited. Post-punk keeps the questioning and the anti-establishment attitude of punk, but became more musically innovative than the always repeating three-chord approach from bands like the Sex Pistols, almost looking at it with a "can people actually dance to this" view. Another great quote on the shift came from Genesis P. Orridge, who said, "Punk is about saying fuck you. Post-punk is saying I'm fucked." Post-punk found itself in an era of a key political struggle, the post-war New Left. But not only that, a study shows that the punk community has contributed a lot to history, with Rolling Stone even publishing an article on how East German punks helped destroy the Berlin Wall, crediting Burning Down the House by Tim Moore, which talks about the 1980s East German punks kickstarting a revolution. No matter where in the world, punks have stood up to their own corrupt government and politics while standing by punks in other countries. And I think that's one of the things that social media has continued to do. We live in a time where it's almost always accessible. No matter where we are, no matter what is happening, it's always accessible. We can always show what is happening in reality. To this day, all these subcultures continue to stand together to address how corrupt our world is and has been for years. So please keep that in mind, this entire rant or video essay, whatever you want to call it. I'm not just saying that punk good, others bad, or social media bad, punk good. But it's simply my observation on how much the world can and has changed, and how much the subcultures can and will change. I want to go back to the topic of women in punk. The first female punk star was called Gay Advert. She was a bass player for the Adverts, who existed from 1976 to 1979, and in those couple of years, they made a huge impact on the punk movement. Gay showed women they could be a part of a predominantly male industry. She inspired so many women to start their own bands, to start making music, to start playing instruments, to start writing lyrics. With the rise of female punk groups, the feminist movement gained a new way to share their voices. Riot Grrrl is a perfect example of this. Originating in Washington, D.C. around the early 90s, Riot Grrrl started as an underground feminist hardcore punk subdivision. It's a lot of words to describe it. It's often associated with third wave feminism, which is sometimes seen as its starting point. Women were tired of being excluded. They were tired of being forced into set gender roles, and sadly, to this day, people still think feminism is woman good, man bad, which has never really and should never really be the case. Riot Grrrl bands were seen as hating men, which in reality, these bands and their lyrics focused more on how women are just as capable as men. Their lyrics were used to speak on the injustice they faced as women by the hands of men. I can't talk about Riot Grrrl without including another subculture which focused on encouraging the voices of the outcast and outcasts. Punk gave a chance to let queer voices be heard. Queercore is a subculture created by and for LGBTQ people, discussing LGBTQ issues, rejecting not only heteronormativity, but resisting homophobia in society as well as the punk scene all around. Both subcultures are often considered to be connected, many bands being queercore and Riot Grrrl. The connections between queercore and Riot Grrrl will come back in a bit. I've rambled on about punk and post-punk for a while now, so I think it's important to start getting into what goth is, how it came to be, whatever. As I stated before, goth is basically the younger sibling of punk. With the post-punk movement, the goth movement came alike. Goth is basically just the darker, more nihilistic younger sibling of the punk genre. Emerging in the United Kingdom around the late 70s, bands like Sushi and the Banshees, Joy Division, Bauhaus, The Cure shifted post-punk to a darker, more dramatic, nihilistic sound. They take inspiration from Gothic literature or architecture, primarily using minor or bass chords and combining it with reverb to create dark, dramatic, melancholic melodies, making just the music alone hint at themes of sadness and death and dark romance. Those same melancholic themes were also featured in their lyrics to represent the evil of the century and the romantic idealization of death. You can skip over this if you want, but I want you to imagine something while you close your eyes. So Close your eyes just for a second. Now imagine the ruins of an old church. The entire area is covered in fog, the wind is whistling around you, and you faintly hear like an organ or a piano playing in the distance. As you walk around, you notice a cemetery connected to the premises. All the graves are covered in plants, black and red roses growing around the area, and it may seem scary at first, but the longer you stay there, the more comforted you feel. As night falls, bats start flying around the area, candles are lighting the entire premises, the scent of wine fills the air. Everything I just told you is exactly what early goth music was portraying or trying to portray through just melodies alone. You can open your eyes again, by the way. Goth music eventually opened the doors to a much broader goth culture, including clubs, fashion, and zines all throughout the 90s, 80s, into the 21st century, creating a safe space for people to be themselves. Once again, I want to emphasize that this video is not social media bad, goth good, or every subculture that is now being spread on social media makes it bad. No, a lot of it is good. Like, how did subcultures spread before? It wasn't on social media, but they were still being spread through word, through visuals, through everything. Of course, in the early years of goth, they didn't have social media or Instagram or Facebook or the internet. So punks originally used their DIY-based beliefs and ethics to create their own zines. Zines were inspired by the fanzines of the science fiction fandoms in the early 1970s. Rockers, punkers, eventually post-punks, and goths created their own magazines to share bands, poems, lyrics, aesthetics, visuals, what they crafted, what they did, just a very creative outlet. Eventually, around the mid-70s, actual magazines started being produced to help the underground music scene. Zines like Punk, Research, Flipside, and Slash originated in the US, while Sniffing Glue was established a few months later in the UK. Eventually, by the time the 80s rolled around, pretty much every scene had their own zine. Zine, it's confusing. I know, I'm sorry. Here's where I want to talk about queercore and Riot Grrrl again, though. Queercore zines started to show up around the 80s. They were inspired and driven by a desire for social change. They strive to promote themes like individual rights, fighting homophobia, and wanting to change how society viewed sexual and gender norms. The topics discussed in the issues often ignited forums and chat rooms where readers could share their opinions. And eventually, the queercore scene began influencing women in the late 80s, early 90s to begin their own zines. As punk gave women a space where they were usually quite outcasted, the Riot Grrrl wave was influential for pink zines, as it called for women to publish and produce content in a male-dominated culture. These pink zines featured political issues from a personal standpoint, as well as mainly feminist themes. Riot Grrrl bands would put out their own zines, featuring collages and other creative outputs to inspire other women how to learn music, how to learn how to play instruments, how to write lyrics, and feel self-empowered. Many of the Riot Grrrl zines also included themes that were common in the queercore scene, making them overlap with queercore zines quite a lot in not only aesthetics but also themes. The exploration of gender and sexual identity was combined with calling for activism, social change, and the tackling of controversial topics like racism and abuse, creating a safe space for women who felt outcasted and unheard. I didn't know how to make this video flow the best way possible. I do want to eventually get to the topic of goths being sexualized. But I think it was important to elaborate a lot on just what went before even the goth movement started, and also focus on the fashion and the fashion ethics of the punk, the post-punk, and the goth subculture to just give you a little bit of a backstory towards why it's even worse that goths get sexualized nowadays. And that's why I want to focus on goth fashion, which is also a big thing in the sexualization of goths. And once again, if we want to look at the ethics of goth fashion, we have to go back to the original punk movement. Because while the punk subculture still advocates for a DIY ethic, with younger generations of punks still upholding it, $200 alt sheen punk hauls are on the rise. Alternative subcultures are being watered down to a sliver of what they used to be. Using everyday objects in their aesthetic choices, Early punkers opted for safety pins, tapes, marker, or black paint to customize their clothes. Completely worn down basics were cut up and used for homemade patches and pins. Bin bags were worn as tops or dresses or skirts, and razor blades were used for jewelry. Some staples in punk fashion are pretty well known. Think of the extremely tight drainpipe jeans, think of tartan prints, think of shoes like creepers or army boots, leather jackets decorated with spikes, painted band logos, patches, pins, buttons, and chains, all that stuff. I don't want to curse. With their hair often being dyed vibrant colors, with their hair being cut in all kind of dramatic shapes or styled into mohawks or liberty spikes, punks once again put emphasis on individuality and standing out in the greater crowd. Part of the punk community were also anti-fashion. They argued that punks should be defined by music or ideology or politics. It was most commonly adapted in the post-80s American hardcore punk scenes, where members often opted for plain t-shirts and jeans rather than the more elaborate choices of their British counterparts. Many of them chose a look based on street clothes worn by the working class. A shirt, some jeans, combat boots, and some kind of hoodie or crewneck were popular choices among hardcore punks. Another important topic of discussion is how punk focused on individual freedom and expression. Fabrics like leather, rubber, and PVC became associated with transgressive sexuality like BDSM and SM. And on the topic of clothes and self-expression, the topic that is so near and dear to my heart, the reason that I'm making this video, is the fact that such an influential subculture has not only watered down its ethics and political views, but has also grown more sexualized over time. Simply typing in goth on sites like Twitter, which I refuse to call X because X in and of itself sounds like a porn site, Twitter and Reddit, results in finding pages upon pages upon pages of goth. Oh my god, my cat is climbing on my bed. Hold on. She decided not to. Okay. Simply typing in goth on any social media site will give you pages upon pages upon pages of goths, goth girls gone wild, goth, and so much more. And the same goes for punk. Not only on visual sites, but also on places like audio. You can't even see them. You have to imagine them. It's just a voice talking to you, and yet they'll still use goth in their titles. Like, there is nothing to there is no visual for goth. You can't be goth just by your voice. You can't be goth just by what you're saying. Anyway, the women being dressed in this video as goth reduce it just to latex and spandex items, putting on eyeliner, dyeing their hair black, and it's caused so much harm than good. What I'm bringing up now is purely personal experiences. Every friend I've talked to who is also in the scene can agree or at least relate to some of what I'm about to say. I grew up with both my parents being alternative. My dad dressed the part for a long time of his life. He listens to punk, he listens to rock, he listens to heavy metal, and he still adapts the same mindsets as early punks did. My mom, she doesn't look like it on the outside, but she's post-punk, new wave, goth. And from the minute I was born, I was surrounded by music. Every car ride included either CDs my dad has bought, CDs my dad has made, or just a local alternative radio station. In the kitchen stood a small radio blasting the same radio station, and in the living room stood a cassette player and a CD player with a display case in front of it filled with just CDs. I'm talking floor to ceiling, filled with CDs. My dad plays and played bass in multiple bands, and as soon as I was old enough, I was supporting him from the sideline. He took me to my first concerts, my first festivals. My mom became my steady concert buddy, not only relying on her as an adult to take her child to a concert, but because she actually wanted to see the bands that I also loved. Why can I not say loved? I have very fond memories of my dad driving me across country to the Netherlands, back and forth just for a night to go see a band that I loved. My parents would let me skip school just to go see live performances. And I know it sounds like I'm bragging right now, but it's just to show that my entire childhood was built on a foundation of music and alternativeness. So I can safely say that even though I haven't always dressed the part, I've been alternative for as long as I can remember. But as soon as I've started dressing the part, I've noticed the shift that I want to address. I've received creepy DMs from men all throughout the time I've been on social media, and I still continue to get them. And I think it's just something that women sadly go through regardless of how they look. But it's the difference in the way the DMs and comments speak to me now that's extremely apparent. What used to be hello with an immediate pic or let me be your daddy has become things like me, on me, does mommy like bad boys? And even worse, I don't know how they do it worse. It's an art form that I don't appreciate, but it somehow can get worse. As Linda West brought up in Female Purity is Bullshit, the sexualization of women is only appealing if it's non-consensual. Otherwise, it's seen as sluttiness. As punks were trying to reject societal norms, they decided to embrace one societal norm. Even though gender did not exist in the punk subculture, nor did it even have any meaning in the subculture, being masculine became the default, as they found that their anger and their strength would be best expressed through masculinity. The main argument in this reasoning, however, was that femininity was seen as bad or as a default in how we conceptualize beauty. And we still see it to this day. Run like a girl, punch like a girl, throw like a girl. Those are all insults. Yet if you change girl to man or to boy, all of a sudden it becomes powerful. Women all throughout history, and even today, still face unachievable beauty standards. Women were and still are expected to be neat and ladylike. The societal revolution punk, post-punk, and goth wished to create challenged the unrealistic beauty standards of their time. Everything that was normally supposed to be hidden or covered was brought to the front both literally and figuratively. Bras and underwear were worn on top of regular clothing. Women wore tight shirts so that their nipples would poke through. Short skirts, ripped tights, and even wearing nothing but a bra and underwear were used as an act of rebellion. And although that act of rebellion can be seen as sexualization, or even worse, asking for it, this was just another way to express themselves. Allowing people to sexualize themselves while still be taken seriously. I'd like to take time to bring up Gay Advert again. Remember how I talked about her? How I praised her for being the first female punk musician? How she's been a massive influence for female musicians? If you got curious and you looked at some clips of her playing, you were probably impressed, right? Sadly, that's not how men in the industry remember her. In a documentary from the BBC about the adverts, Richard Strange from Doctors of Madness said, I think she was embarrassed about being a sex icon. You know, she had a certain diffidence that could be construed as insolence. Was she a great musician? No. And a bit later, Grail Marcus, author of Lipstick Traces, spoke, okay, she had this great face, but she couldn't play. The entire narrative of early punk was that even if the music didn't follow any musical rules, it was meant as a statement until a woman shows up. Look at the treatment bands like The Slits, Girlhood, the L7s got in the 80s and the 90s because they were actively trying not to be sexualized. Gay wasn't a sex symbol. She was never interested in being one or becoming one. She wanted what every other punk wanted. She wanted to make a statement and rock out. As I said before, I grew up in the alternative scene and I've seen all and every variation of she's hot but she can't play get thrown at literally every single female musician at least once in their career. And it breaks my heart to see how it has been and currently still is and probably always will be something female musicians and artists go through. Clothes have no way to give consent. Clothes have no way of showing if someone is intelligent or not. Clothes have no way of showing if someone is kind or not. Clothes are simply just pieces of fabric you can use for self-expression. The clothes, the fabric, and mainly the attitude of the reason why alternative people dress the way they dress has become the exact opposite of what they once wished to achieve by dressing this way. OnlyFans models have infiltrated the goth and alt tags on social media, taking away from people actually trying to find community and more so finding people that prey on the community. My algorithm occasionally pushes those Goth Dommy mommies on my feed because sadly, it views them in the same category. And all I can think of is the younger audiences who are looking for a place to be themselves, yet they find the completely wrong side of it all. Even I, when I want to find more people in the community or fashion or makeup inspo, I come across these accounts that only post goth girls, and the majority of them are just half-naked OnlyFans girls, photoshops to the gods to fit into the unachievable beauty standards of our time. And the comments under those posts are the same things being said in my DMs. In frustration and while researching this video, I've shown some of those accounts that only post goth girls or only post alternative women to my mom, and even she is shocked by the turn it has taken. I don't know who this video will reach, whether you are alternative and you were just interested, or if you just like listening to people yap in the background. I hope it at least brought you some insightful information or just even something to think about. I could honestly ramble about so much of these topics, whether it's from the start of subcultures to how ethics have changed to the dark side of subcultures, or even just how fucking harmful the porn industry is. So if anyone is interested at all, let me know. But for now, this is where I'm going to end my ramblings. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.